differentiation, first chapter, or derivative. Okay. Last year in derivative we had learned algebra of derivative, that is addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. So this year we will be learning derivative of composite function or chain rule. So first heading is what? Derivative of composite function or chain rule. One very important theorem is there, they ask most of the times in board exam. Theorem: if y is what? A differentiable function of u, and u is what? Differentiable function of x, b2 differentiable functions, then prove that derivative of y with respect to x, derivative of y with respect to x is what? Derivative of y with respect to u into derivative of u with respect to x. Theorem statement. Derivative of y with respect to u into derivative of u with respect to x. See the proof. Look here. Here. Y depends upon u and u depends upon x. So if there is increment delta x in x, there will be increment delta u in u. And if there is increment delta u in u, there will be increment delta y in y, because they depends upon each other. The increment will start from where? Some in x. So see here, let delta x be a small increment in x, and let corresponding increment in u be delta u, and hence let corresponding increment in y be delta y. Where? What will happen when there is no increment in x? Just if there is no increment in x,
No incremental.
Very good. So as delta x tends to 0, delta u also tends to 0. In usual notation, Sriya, what do you mean by usual notation? As usual, हमेशा की तरह, sun rise in east. तो वैसे ही हमेशा की तरह डेल्टा y by डेल्टा x is equal to डेल्टा y by डेल्टा u into delta u by delta x. Here delta u will get cancelled. What is left? Delta y by delta x. That is why it is called usual notation. In usual notation, delta y by delta x is what? Delta y by delta u into delta u by delta x. If you remember, in algebra of derivative, I gave various steps to find, prove theorems of derivative. First principle was limit h tends to 0, f of x plus h minus fx upon h. If this limit exists, then we say that functions were differentiable, and this limit is called derivative and denoted as what? F dash x or dy by dx. So dy by dx is same as f dash x, which is same as this limit, provided this limit exists, if exists. And then I told various steps. First step was f of x plus h. Second step is what? F of x plus h minus fx. Then third step is what? To find this limit. F of x plus h minus fx upon h. Fourth step is what? Taking limit as h tends to 0. That is, limit h tends to 0, f of x plus h minus fx upon h. What was fifth step? Whether limit exists or not. If limit exists, then we say that functions were differentiable, otherwise not. Okay? So then we write this limit as what? F dash x or dy by dx. Now in Leibniz notation, same steps are as follow. F of x plus h is same as what? Het we y plus delta y. Then we subtract old value. In y plus delta y, subtract old value, that is y. Fx means y. And y will get cancelled. What is left, Akansha? Delta y. After that, we'll divide by delta x. So next step is what? Delta y divided by delta x. Then next step is what? Taking limit as, here h tends to 0 is same as what? Delta x tends to 0, delta y by delta x. That means this is same as what? This. And next step is what? Whether limit exists or not. If limit exists, then we say that function what? Differentiable. Okay? So here, at this moment, we are at which step? Can you tell me? Just third step. That is delta y by delta x. Clear? So in 12th standard, we directly jump on this third step because of composite function. Now next step is what, Shia? Akansha? Jivika? After this, what is next step? Taking limit. What is next step? Taking limit as delta x tends to 0. Taking limit as delta x tends to 0, we get limit delta x tends to 0, delta y by delta x is equal to limit delta x tends to 0, delta y by delta u into delta u by delta x. Now next step is what? Separating of limit. Limit delta x tends to 0, delta y by delta x is equal to limit delta x tends to 0, delta y by delta u into limit delta x tends to 0, delta u by delta x. Now in denominator we have got delta x and delta x is approaching to 0. Here also delta u, delta x is approaching to 0, but in this case we have got delta u, whereas limit is what? Delta x is approaching to 0. Akansha, what is required here? Delta is what? Delta u. So what is required? Delta u. नहीं समझा? जो भी डिनोमिनेटर में वही चाहिए अपने को लिमिट में. उधर देख. No, what is required? You just tell me that. Delta u. How will you get delta u? Hetwi. How will you get delta u? Or what is given? Whenever delta x tends to 0, delta u also tends to 0. So we can directly replace. So limit delta x tends to 0, delta y by delta x is equal to limit delta u tends to 0, delta y by delta u into limit delta x tends to 0, delta u by delta x. This will write equation number 1. What's the reason for this? As delta x tends to 0, that time delta u also tends to 0. This is the reason. Now next step is what? Just
so checking it limit
very good. Whether limit exists or not. So if you remember first principle of derivative, if limit h tends to 0, f of x plus h minus fx upon h exists. If limit exists, then we say that function is what? Differentiable. Limit exists, then differentiable. Limit exists, then differentiable. Here already x and y are given to be differentiable functions. That means limit will exist. So here, if y is equal to fu and u is equal to gx, be two differentiable functions. So differential functions are given. If limit exists, then we say differentiable. Here already u and v are given to be, and y is given to be differential function of u and u is given to be differential function of x. That means limit will exist. If limit exists, then differentiable. Here already it is given to be differential functions. Since y is given to be differentiable function of u, y is given to be differential function of u, and u is given to be differentiable function of x. Therefore, limit delta u tends to 0, delta y by delta u, and limit delta x tends to 0, delta u by delta x, both will exist. And limit delta u tends to 0, delta y by delta u is what? dy by du. And limit delta x tends to 0, delta u by delta x is what? Jivika, clear? X and y is given to be differential function of u and u is given to be differentiable function of x. That means this limit will exist, and this limit is what? Derivative of y with respect to u and denoted by dy by du. As well as this limit exists, and we say that u is differential function of x and this limit is denoted by du by dx. Okay? Since both the limits on right hand side, on right hand side of equation 1 exist, therefore limit on left hand side of equation 1 will also exist. Both the limits on right hand side of equation 1 exist, therefore limit on left hand side of equation 1 also exist. And this limit is denoted by what? dy by dx. Therefore equation 1 becomes dy by dx is what? dy by du into du by dx. See, revision of this. Let delta x be small increment in x, and let corresponding increment in u be delta u, because u depends upon x. And if there is increment in u, there will be increment in y, because y depends upon u. And hence let corresponding increment in y be delta y. As delta x tends to 0, that is, there is no increment in x, then delta u also tends to 0. There will be no increment in u. In usual notation, delta y by delta x is what? Delta y by delta u into delta u by delta x. Taking limit as delta x tends to 0, we get limit delta x tends to 0, delta y by delta x is equal to limit delta x tends to 0, delta y by delta u into delta u by delta x. Now we'll separate limit. Therefore limit delta x tends to 0, delta y by delta x is what? Limit delta x tends to 0 by delta u into limit delta x tends to 0, delta u by delta x. Therefore limit delta x tends to 0, delta y by delta x is what? Limit delta u tends to 0, delta y by delta u into limit delta x tends to 0, delta u by delta x. Equation number 1. The reason is what? As delta x tends to 0, delta u also tends to 0. Since y is given to be differential function of u and u is given to be differential function of x, therefore limit delta u tends to 0, delta y by delta u and limit delta x tends to 0, delta u by delta x both will exist, and limit delta u tends to 0, delta y by delta u is what? dy by du. Limit delta x tends to delta u by delta x is what? du by dx. Since both the limits on right hand side of equation 1 exist, therefore limit on left hand side of equation 1 will also exist, and limit delta x tends to 0, delta y by delta x is what? dy by dx. Therefore equation 1 becomes dy by dx is equal to dy by du into du by dx. In doubt? Turn on first.